it's Kali, and today we are starting a little bit of a new thing on this channel. So this was something I was really in between making for quite some time because I wasn't really sure if I wanted it to be something on my website, on my blog. You done there, Klaus? So this was something I was in between doing for quite some time. I was unsure if I wanted it to be on my website or if I wanted it to be here, if I wanted to make it like a Patreon thing. I decided because I actually got, in the past couple of months, a lot of DMs, some comments between TikTok, YouTube, and Instagram that were more like beginner cosplay focused. And I always will consider myself beginner in everything because I'm somebody who just likes to learn all the time. I think it's a great mindset to be in, that you're always a beginner at stuff, because it keeps your eyes open to new opportunities to learn all the time. But I guess I do have a bit of experience at the same time. I was fortunate enough in my last year of college to take costume design courses. Looking outside, it's snowing and it's so beautiful. I love it so much. I love it until I have to drive to work in it tomorrow. So I decided I would make a beginner sewing series of sorts that's focused on cosplay. I'm not necessarily a pro at wigs or foam or many things in cosplay I still have to learn. I'll be picking up foam crafting in the next week actually, because I have to for Edelgard and time is running really low. But I do have some time sewing under my belt, and that is the knowledge I can share because I have some. I still am not a pro, but I think I know enough to at least help somebody who's trying to get started off. So this video will be a very, very broad overview. I think even if you have some experience in cosplay, it might help you to see it from a different point of view. And I really wanted to give another perspective on things. I think sometimes some people don't remember what it's like to be a beginner at things. I don't know if you guys have ever had this experience, but I go to a lot of workout classes, right? So there's some Pilates instructors I've had where it feels like they forgot what it's like to not be athletic. So they just don't give modified versions of anything and things like that. So there's some cosplay channels, like I love Kamui Cosplays so much. Like her content is amazing, but she's really out of touch with what it's like to be like sometimes in her newer content with less resources, less budget. She's got like what, a $2,000 3D printer? And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, I totally would too. Like, don't get me wrong. But sometimes when you make videos that are tutorials and such, some people can get really out of touch with what it's actually like to genuinely be a beginner at something. So I want this to be more in touch with that. And I think as I get older and more experienced, I will also probably lose more touch with that. But just a year ago, I was a broke college student doing cosplay and trying to make cosplay. So I think I'm still very in touch with that, and while I'm in touch with that, I'd really love to make this because I can still understand what it's like to be in that phase of beginning something, and you also don't want to put all your eggs in one basket when you're not sure if you like something or not yet. So anyways, let's get started. Okay, I need to show you guys the snow. It is too pretty. Look at how beautiful it is. I'm dying. So pretty. There will be multiple videos too. I think this is something I forgot to mention. I'm putting a little episode 1 at the end of this because I'm gonna put this all on a playlist, and eventually I'd like to write a blog post for each of these. So I will update that on social media. Please follow me on my social media if you're not already. I don't really post updates here on my YouTube, but I do on my Instagram. I actually probably post too much on my Instagram. I'm really sorry guys, but I'm really active on there. I'm not as active on here because I just post videos pretty much. But I feel like if a creator kind of has their platform that they post updates on, it's probably Instagram for me. So definitely follow me there if you'd like to hear more, because I'll announce when I put up the blog posts. To start off, I would say it's really important to look. So if you want to start making cosplay, look at what you already have in your closet. Or if you have cosplays that you buy, look at those. I know that's not really like something that I think it contributes a lot, because you can learn the most from stuff that was professionally made or that is really beautifully made, and look up how it's made. So, okay, I'll give an example of this. Let's say I buy a cosplay from Doki Doki, right? Doki Doki has the probably one of the best craftsmanship qualities in the entire cosplay selling market, dare I say. And let's say I love this cosplay so much, but none of mine can get to that level of quality. I can just turn it inside out and look at what they're doing. Like, okay, why, like, how are the inside edges finished off? Why do I love that so much? Let's look at the hem. Let's look at every piece of this. And that terminology might be really new, but you can look up, like, I'm thinking of something on this piece. Let's say I really like how the sleeves have this frill at the end. I can look up scrunched frill how-to on YouTube. Just get curious, get your mind thinking that way. I almost like to say, think of clothing as more of a science rather than thinking of it as something that you just throw on. Start to look at clothing that way. Like a chef looks at food. If a chef goes out to a restaurant that's not their own, they might taste the food and be like, wait, I like something in here. I'm inspired. Like, I'm gonna make something with this combination of spices that I can taste because I like this combination of spice. Start to look at clothing with that angle. And I think that has helped me so much because there's this one designer brand I'm wearing right now called Liz Lisa. It's based in Japan. And I love their stuff so much. Like, I just love the material. Like, it feels really good to wear. So I've kind of nerded out about it. Like, I've done a ton of research on it. I've found all the materials and I've applied some of it to my cosplay even because I want the cosplay to feel good. And sometimes I make my own clothing too, and that helps a ton. Odd point, but I don't think I've actually ever heard anyone say that. But before I could afford to make my own cosplay, something I would do is I would actually just go to Macy's a lot and try on stuff that I liked and take little notes and say, I really like the way that this feels and fits. How could I do this myself, right? And I think even if you're not able to make your own cosplays at this point, it'll shift your mindset into a point where when you do pick up a sewing machine and sewing, it just clicks, you know, it makes sense to you. I think my heater just went on and I'm so sorry if it's making a ton of background noise, guys. I'm gonna try to talk a little louder. That I wanted to talk about is like fabric, right? So I would actually say before even buying patterns, you should get familiar with fabric. Sewing, I would say, is 20% sewing and 80% everything else. You're not actually sewing 100% of the time. There's so much thought and so much little details that go into it that are not at the machine that it's really, really important to, that's why it's so hard for a lot of people too, right? Like, you don't just cut it out and throw it together. There's a lot of mental components that go in there. So it's really good when you start to think of fabric. So I've been working on my Ironingggg cosplay recently, right? I'll try to add photos for everything, by the way. And if you were to go to the costume section of a fabric store, you would probably find a really cheap satiny type of material that's about $7 a yard. And intuitively, you want to use that, right? Because it makes sense. No, don't use that. But because I go to Joann's a lot and I just touch the fabrics, I knew in the uniform section there was a material that I liked that was really weighty. It wasn't like scrub material. I don't know how to describe it. It was meant for work clothing though. It was heavy duty, and I thought of that material and I thought that would be perfect. Ironinggg's a freaking empress. Like, of course Ironingggg would wear that kind of stuff, and she wouldn't just wear humdrum $7 a yard set. Familiar with the terms, right? Just touch the fabric, go through fabric stores. Every fabric store you have locally, make yourself a mind map, right? Say, I have this one 5 miles from me, this one across the street, I have this one downtown that sells these materials. Get a mental inventory of where everything is and get to know the store, right? This goes along with knowing your clothing, is also knowing the materials. There's whole books of just the different materials, but you don't know until you touch them. I think Mood Fabric sells like a huge fabric swatch book. They're kind of pricey though. I think they're like $100 or more on a lot of websites, the fabric swatching books. I would love one even, because then I could just feel all of them. It's one of the most material type hobbies you can have, right? It's very physical. You have to really know you have to know your tools, right? So get to know fabric, get to know it very well. Know what it feels like. Like, is it itchy? Or you want to think, when you see a character, you want to think, what material could that be, right? And you want to have that mental mind map, as I like to call it, and you can go, okay, well, I know the store across the street sells more materials that are more cottony. I want something that would feel more like a bridal type material, like a casa material, and I'm gonna have to go 10 minutes that way to get it. But if you know it well enough, then maybe you could find a bargain online in like the warehouses. I would say whenever you can, shop in your physical fabric stores, because a lot of those businesses really struggle, and I know Joann's is one of the very few businesses that has a specific cosplay section, and I will always, even though it costs so much extra, if I can afford it, I will absolutely buy there because I want to support them, right? So try to support them whenever you can, because it's hard to be a fabric store nowadays when everyone shops online. But the thing is it's really hard to be a beginner and shop online. And because of that, fabric stores are an amazing resource. They're like a little library, right, of all the fabric you need. not like you can just put it back though, but you know what I mean. And it's really important for people to have who are trying to get into sewing. So I think it's really important that we support those places. And as craft people, we give to them when we can, right? That is something I always advise. When there is a cosplay specific section, you try to buy from that so we can give into it, or just fabric stores in general, because they're such a great place. I can't say that enough because I really care about it. And something that doesn't have to do with buying fabric, but this is definitely a getting started on sewing tip: pre-wash everything. Just trust me. Pre-wash everything possible. Just do a whole load with like your red fabric that you just bought, and if you want to, dry it if you plan on drying it. If you don't plan on drying it, just air dry it. I usually air dry it. I never ever put my cosplays through the dryer ever. But pre-wash your fabric. Look up what pre-washing fabric is. It's what it sounds like. You wash your fabric in advance because colors bleed so easily. If you have a white jacket on your cosplay and the cosplay's bright red and you don't pre-wash it, your white jacket on a 90-degree day is going to turn into a pink jacket because the red's going to bleed into it. So absolutely wash everything possible. I'd say buy some fabric to play with too. I usually suggest, if you're getting started off, buy a few yards of muslin, natural muslin. It's better. It's probably a little better for the environment than some other materials too. Be conscientious of that. Don't put too much to waste, but that'll be your practice fabric. It's the type I buy is like $2 a yard. It's super inexpensive. You can make mock-ups with it. Practice fabric, it's what my costume design teachers used as practice fabric, and I still do for my own. Now I have a lot of scrap fabric I use though, but you get what I mean. Get a ton of muslin when you start, because you'll need it for everything, and you can practice on it with less guilt too, because it's a more natural material and it costs less. Next up is patterns. So I'm just gonna kind of introduce the concept of patterns and not go too into it in this video, because this is like a broad overview with some random snippets of advice and my opinions on how to get started. But the patterns are guides on how to make pieces, if that makes sense. So you could buy a pattern for a whole dress, or you could just buy a pattern for the sleeves, right? Or you could buy a pattern for an apron. You could buy a pattern for just about anything and everything. There's even patterns for whole cosplays. People on Etsy sell them all the time. So patterns come in two forms. Either you can buy them in PDF form, or you can buy them in physical form. I never ever buy PDFs. And if I do, you can go to websites to get them printed. So you need to attach them to your fabric and then cut out the fabric accordingly. So it's best to have them in physical format. A problem with a lot of the PDF ones is you have to tape paper by paper together. There was a girl in my costume design class who did that for a pretty simple pattern, and she probably spent as long as it took us to get started on the whole project just taping together the pattern. And that's something to definitely consider. Would it be faster for you to just get it printed, like on big sheets of paper? Probably. Come in those two forms. You could buy the physical form at Joann's usually, or a lot of fabric stores will sell them. I've even thrifted a lot. Sometimes people will, at like thrift stores, will donate whole boxes of sewing patterns, so keep your eyes open for those, and they'll be really cool vintage ones too. You don't think about patterns in a linear way either, where you have to just follow the pattern exactly and just the pattern, do it everything to the I don't know what the term to use. Do everything in one certain way, I guess. You can combine 2 or 3 patterns, you can resize patterns, you can do so much with them. But think about them as just instructions on how to make pieces. So if I'm making a dress, I might use 1 pattern for the sleeve, 1 pattern for the skirt, and 1 pattern for the top part, and then combine them all because I want it to look a certain way. I did that with my first version of Hilda cosplay because that just worked best for it, right? Like I needed an A-line skirt, a certain top with a certain bodice, and certain sleeves. So I used different patterns for everything, and there's no problem with doing that. Also, measure yourself. Every single pattern has different sizes, pretty much. Different brands have different sizes. I know there's ways to resize them. You will have to find those. Probably, I will probably never make a tutorial for how to do that. To be honest, I don't know. I am an exact pattern size. I never have to resize my patterns, but you can resize them. I've seen people do it. It is very doable. If patterns aren't in your size, it's not the end of the world. So I would say to face them with an open mind, get really creative with them. I'll make a separate video just on patterns though. I'm just giving an overview on what everything kind of does and why it's so important. Another reason that muslin material I was talking about earlier is so important as well is that you will need to make mock-ups for all your patterns, and you can use scrap. You can use scrap fabric, but I'm imagining if you're beginning, you don't have that much scrap fabric. I have a ton, so usually I don't need to use muslin, but you want to, whenever you use a pattern, I learned this the hard way, don't make it with your real fabric first. You want to make sure it fits, right? So always make a mock-up or a copy with fabric that you don't care about first. So then maybe you'll just have maybe if you use a fabric you don't care about that looks good, maybe you'll just have 2 of them even. But make it, see what I mean now by like most of sewing isn't actually just the final result. Like maybe it's even less than 20% of it. A lot of it is just the thought and work that goes into planning it. And that's just a part of planning it. A lot of patterns, like even if a pattern says it'll fit your measurements exactly, you might try on the mock-up and go, ooh, this has to change. So you'll tailor it, cut it down, and do all of that. And then you'll tear apart those pieces and use those as the pattern, which I will also be showing you how to do that in this. This is why this needs to be a whole series, because these videos can get very long and there's a lot of parts that go into it, and I would be doing sewing an injustice to try to stuff it all into one long video. Last thing that I put in my notes here that I didn't mention is Etsy has whole patterns for maybe I did, but Etsy usually has whole patterns for cosplay, but they'll be the PDF type, so you could get them printed, but you can usually find really cool patterns on there. And then also Cut and Sew makes really good cosplay patterns. I really like them for beginners because they give really good directions, in my opinion at least, and they give printed versions, and they use a really nice paper that's like, it's not easy to tear, and they use colors, and it's just, I feel like that's probably one of the most beginner friendly ones if you go for one of their more simple patterns, because it's really difficult and detailed for a lot of people. So start with something really simple. You're gonna just wound your ego if you start with things that are too hard for yourself, and you're never going to want to sew again. I can guarantee it's not you, and you're probably just starting up here when you need to be here, right? Guys, next up, this needs its own chunk of time. Iron anything and everything. Even if you have cosplays right now, iron them. Just every step of the way sewing, you should be ironing in between every step of the process, right? So if you're on your actual piece, you should cut out your pattern pieces, then iron, and then put them together, and as you put each piece together, iron the seam in between. And then iron again when the piece is together. And you get what I mean? Just iron all the time. Always have the ironing board out. Like, they're going to be as important as your sewing machine, because the thing is, things will always look homemade and not professional if you don't iron them. They will just always look, you'll always look at your pieces and go, something's just not very good. And I didn't iron as much as I do now, like 6 months ago, and I went through that. So that's what I'm telling you now, right? Ironing is going to save your butt. Just do it. Like, trust me on that. On iron is probably it's as important as your sewing machine. It doesn't even have to be a very fancy one. I think I got mine from Walmart for like 30 bucks, and I've had it for years, and it's the best iron ever. And I just got a big ironing board, but you can use your bed. You can use like a little mini ironing board. You could just use foam and fabric and cover a table in it and use that as an ironing cover. Like, there's so many ways to go about it. Just iron. It is, you should not be sewing if you cannot iron. Like, that's harsh, but it's, you'll see why. It's that important. It'll make, you will think you are bad at sewing if you are not ironing your stuff, and then you will end up hating sewing. And I do not want you hating sewing, so just iron. It might seem really tedious, but you'll fall in love with it. You'll find it very therapeutic. It'll just take a little bit of time, but you'll see why in the end. So my last little piece of this first video is my little supplies kit. So I made a list of the supplies I consistently use to keep it as minimal as possible, even though there's quite a few things on here. Sewing is not necessarily a cheap hobby, but you can collect them over time. And I use these things for every single project. So yeah. First of all, I have my fabric scissors, and then I have my paper scissors. It's really important you don't cut the paper with the fabric scissors, otherwise you're gonna wear them down too much. Fabric scissors look very different. They have a little bend. I'll try to attach photos. They have like a little bend at the wrist. If you're left-handed, they have left-handed ones. Get left-handed ones. I used right-handed ones forever, and I'm a lefty. I realized it made a world of difference when I picked up my left-handed ones. So you will need those two scissors, and you also want very little thread snipping ones, and these are great too for you to carry to conventions. Maybe not. Some conventions don't allow, I don't know. I had my scissors scanned going to Anime New York City, and they didn't set anything off, so I think they're fine to carry places. But it's good to have something little to just get rid of those little threads with. And then next up is transfer paper. This is like this colorful paper that comes in packs of red, blue, and yellow usually. And then the tool to transfer them, I actually don't know the technical name for it. I'll put a photo of it up and look up the technical name when I'm editing, so then you guys have the correct one. Put it down here. So this tool will basically, you put this in between your fabric and your pattern, and you trace the lines on your pattern with it. I'll explain later on, but there's little lines and indentations that mean things on patterns that you'll want to mark down with this. I use this even not for patterns, just to trace lines out on pleats and stuff. I love these two items. They make things really helpful. Next up, pins. That's obvious, you need to hold things together. Always get ballpoint. You will end up stepping on some if they are not easy to see. Get the ones with the biggest balls. Get the ones that are just very noticeable. Like, if you get ones with like little animal heads on them, even get them. Just make sure they're extremely noticeable. I have stepped on way too many pins in my lifetime. When I was a little kid, my grandma got me these sewing pins that I used growing up that were not even very noticeable, and I stepped on so many of them. Oh, it's just so terrible to think about even. Just get very noticeable ones. Next up, hand sewing needles. These ones actually have like a little hole at top. Try to get the ones with the biggest hole at the top possible, because those will be easier to thread. Well, maybe not the biggest possible, but you know what I mean. And you're gonna have to thread them a lot. So next up, machine. You're gonna need a machine. I actually have like a $200 machine. I can link it below. It's lasted me years. I love it. A lot of machines nowadays, they're not as sturdy as they used to make them, so they're gonna break on you every 3 or 4 years. It's just kind of become a fact of life. You're gonna have to probably rebuy them. You can buy very nice mechanical ones. I learned my costume design class on a Bernina, which is like a super fancy, nice machine, but those broke all the time too. You're just gonna kind of have to learn how to fix it as you go. I'll do a machine troubleshooting video if that helps, but it's how it is. So you're probably gonna want to replace it every so often. So I actually say sometimes you're better off just getting a less expensive one that you don't mind replacing every few years. Mine has been really good to me though. I absolutely love my machine, so I will link it. It was a great investment. I've had probably in my life like 4 machines. So you just kind of, it just happens. They're just not made of metal anymore, you know? And I like the fancy stitches, so that's why I don't have like a vintagey or mechanical one. I want to do the little details. Next up are machine needles. Just keep these around. I'll explain the different purposes later on, but there's like universal and ballpoint, and there's different types of needles for different types of fabrics. Next up, I already mentioned this, iron. An iron is very important. I can link the one I have below as well. And everything I have in the links I've used for years, and it's been pretty good to me. And an ironing board is also super important. But you don't need an ironing board. Like, this might be an optional because I have a friend, for example, who used to use her bed growing up to iron. And that's actually really genius because you get a huge amount of space. So next up is markers, pencils, and chalk. I prefer chalk. I don't ever use markers or pencils. I'd say play with some though. There's markers that will dissolve with water. Those are great. There's so much water soluble type of things you can use in sewing that we'll get into down the road. I don't like pencils at all. They don't wash off that easy. But if you like pencils, you like pencils. So use pencils. And then measuring tape, you'll want all your measurements. If you can have somebody else measure you, even better. But you'll want to use this all the time, and not just for your own measurements. You want to measure things, I don't know, just from a 3D point of view. So it's really good to have. And then lastly, I'd say you need a straight clear ruler that's really big, and this is so you can draw straight lines and make flat measurements. But that list is I'll put that in the description too. That's my basic list of what you need for sewing and why I think you need it. That's like the bare minimum I think will get you through. Besides project specific things. We'll talk about project specific things later on, and I count that as like the thread, the elastic, the bias tape, the fabric. Like, you don't just buy that to start, you know what I mean? So I'm gonna work on the next videos. This is probably gonna be a pretty lengthy series because I want to dump all of my knowledge that I can here, that I feel comfortable with as I learn too. And I think teaching things helps you solidify your own knowledge because I have to fact check myself on a lot of things. So I hope you guys will enjoy this. Even if you're not a cosplayer, who knows, you might find it fun. Where did my cats get a Christmas ornament? It's February. Bobo, where did you find that? Anyways, besides that, there's a Christmas ornament sitting over there now. I hope you guys enjoy, and I'll keep posting about the series. I might try to make it a weekly thing outside my regular content. This is something I'm very passionate about too, and I hope I can add a different perspective to it and make it fun. And I'll do more project specific type videos. I might do like a simple project just to show you guys how things work too, and we'll go from there. So thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I will see you guys next week.